Never let anyone call you a leech maid when they have no idea who you really are. I learned this lesson the hard way at 70 years old, standing in a room full of strangers who were laughing at me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this story really begins. 45 years ago, when Robert Thompson and I were young, broke, and stupid enough to believe we could build something from nothing. It was 1978, and Robert had this crazy idea about starting a manufacturing company. We were living in a one-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery, surviving on ramen noodles and dreams. I was working as a secretary at Henderson and Associates, making barely enough to cover rent, while Robert spent his days sketching business plans on napkins and talking to anyone who would listen about his vision. "Maggie," he said one evening, spreading those crumpled napkins across our tiny kitchen table, "what if we could make something that lasts? Something bigger than just getting by?" I looked at his drawings, crude sketches of manufacturing equipment, flow charts that made sense only to him, numbers that seemed impossibly optimistic. Any rational person would have laughed. Instead, I opened my savings account the next morning and withdrew every penny I had. $3,247. It was supposed to be my emergency fund, my safety net, my ticket out if things went wrong. "Here," I said, placing the envelope on his napkin-covered table. "Let's build something that lasts." Robert stared at the money like it was made of gold. "Maggie, I can't take this. What if we fail? What if you lose everything?" "Then we'll lose it together," I said, "but we won't fail." For the next 5 years, I lived that promise every single day. While Robert focused on the technical side, finding suppliers, designing processes, securing that first contract with Midwest Industries, I became everything else the company needed. I was the bookkeeper, keeping track of every expense in a composition notebook. I was the secretary, answering our single phone line from the kitchen counter. I was the cleaning crew, making sure our tiny warehouse looked professional when clients visited. When Michael was born in 1980, I brought him to the office in a bassinet, changing diapers between client calls and nursing him during lunch breaks. Robert would come home exhausted from 16-hour days, collapse onto our second-hand couch, and I'd put Michael to bed, then spend another 3 hours updating the books by lamplight. "You should rest," Robert would mumble, half asleep. "I'll rest when we're successful," I'd whisper back, calculating whether we could afford that new printing press Robert wanted. The breakthrough came in 1983. Midwest Industries offered us an exclusive 5-year contract worth $2 million. I remember the exact moment Robert got the call. I was feeding Michael in his high chair, and Robert started jumping around our kitchen like he'd won the lottery. "We did it, Maggie! We actually did it!" But with success came new challenges. The contract required us to triple our capacity in 6 months. We needed a real facility, industrial equipment, and a staff of 20 employees. The bank wanted collateral we didn't have and guarantees we couldn't make. That's when I made the second biggest financial sacrifice of my life. My grandmother had left me a small inheritance, $20,000 that I'd never touched, money that was supposed to be my children's college fund someday. Without telling Robert, I used it as collateral for the business loan. When he found out, he cried. Actual tears right there in the bank parking lot. "You've given up everything for this dream, Maggie. Everything." "No," I said, wiping his face with my sleeve. "I've invested everything in our dream. There's a difference." By 1988, Thompson Industries was generating $5 million in annual revenue. We moved to the big house on Elm Street, the one with the wraparound porch and the 3-car garage. Robert insisted on putting my name on everything: the house, the cars, the business accounts. More importantly, he restructured the company ownership. "I want you to have 52%, he said, sliding the legal documents across our new mahogany dining table. "Robert, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is." His voice was firm. "You sacrificed your career for mine. You invested your money when no one else would. You worked without pay for 5 years. This company exists because of you, Maggie. If something happens to me, I need to know you'll be taken care of. I need to know you'll have the power to protect what we built. I signed those papers with shaking hands, never imagining I'd need that protection against my own son. Michael grew up in the business. Summer jobs in the warehouse, weekend shifts in accounting, college internships in every department. After graduating with his MBA, he joined as a junior manager and worked his way up. When Robert had his first heart attack in 2010, Michael stepped into the CEO role naturally. When Robert died 2 years later, Michael was ready to take over completely. That's when Ashley entered our lives. Michael met her at a business conference in Chicago. She was working for a marketing firm, all sharp suits and sharper ambition. She was beautiful, confident, and everything I'd never been. College-educated, professionally successful, socially polished. When Michael brought her home for Thanksgiving that first year, I tried to like her. I really did. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, barely glancing at me as she examined our family photos. "Michael tells me you've never worked outside the home. That must be nice, having that luxury." I bit my tongue. Michael jumped in quickly. "Actually, Mom helped build the company from the ground up. She was Dad's partner in everything." Ashley smiled that thin smile I'd come to know so well. "That's sweet. It's wonderful when hobbies work out." Hobbies. 20 years of 16-hour days, financial sacrifice, and strategic decision-making reduced to a hobby. They married 18 months later in an elaborate ceremony that cost more than our first house. Ashley insisted on planning everything herself, making it clear that my input wasn't welcome. "It's the bride's day," she reminded me when I suggested we might invite some of Robert's old business partners. "I want it to be perfect." Perfect, apparently, meant forgetting where the money for her perfect wedding came from. After the wedding, things changed quickly. Ashley moved into what she called my house. The house Robert and I had bought. The house where I'd raised Michael. The house filled with 40 years of memories. She immediately began redecorating, replacing our family photos with abstract art, covering Robert's favorite reading chair with a white slipcover, turning his office into her yoga studio. "We need more space," she announced one morning over breakfast. "Margaret, we've set up a lovely room for you in the basement. It has its own bathroom and everything." I looked at Michael, waiting for him to object. He was focused intently on his coffee. "The basement?" I said quietly. "It's really nice down there," Ashley continued brightly, "much quieter. And since you'll be helping out around the house anyway, it makes sense to have you closer to the laundry room." Helping out around the house. That's how it started. At first it seemed reasonable. I was living there rent-free, after all, and I'd always enjoyed cooking and keeping house. When Ashley asked me to prepare dinner for her book club, I said yes. When she needed someone to watch the twins, Michael Jr. and Emma, born just 10 months apart, I was happy to help. When she mentioned that the cleaning lady was too expensive, I offered to take over those duties temporarily. Temporarily became permanently so, gradually that I didn't notice the shift until it was complete. "Margaret," Ashley would call from upstairs while I was doing laundry, "can you iron Michael's shirts for the week and maybe start dinner? I'm running late for my yoga class." Or, "Margaret, the Johnsons are coming for dinner Friday. Something impressive, okay? Michael's trying to land their account." Or, "Margaret, could you pick up the twins from school? I have a spa appointment that I absolutely cannot miss." I told myself I was being helpful. I told myself this was temporary, just until Ashley adjusted to being a working mother. I told myself that Michael appreciated what I was doing, even if he didn't say so explicitly. I was lying to myself about all of it. The truth was simpler and more painful. Ashley had systematically transformed me from Michael's mother into their unpaid domestic help, and Michael, caught between his wife and his mother, had chosen the path of least resistance. He'd chosen silence. The final humiliation came at the Thompson Industries' 25th anniversary gala. I'd been looking forward to it for months. It was a celebration of everything Robert and I had built, everything we'd sacrificed for. I bought a new dress, navy blue with pearls, elegant but understated. I had my hair done at the salon Ashley frequented. I wanted to look like the co-founder of a successful company, like the woman who'd helped build something that lasted. The event was held at the Grand Ballroom downtown, the same venue where Michael and Ashley had held their wedding reception. The room was filled with clients, employees, suppliers, and local business leaders. I recognized faces from decades of Christmas parties, retirement celebrations, and company picnics. These were people who'd watched our company grow, who'd been part of our extended business family. I was standing near the bar, nursing a glass of wine and catching up with Eleanor Martinez from accounting, when Ashley approached with a group of women I didn't recognize. "Ladies," Ashley said, her voice carrying that bright, artificial tone she used for social occasions. "I'd like you to meet my mother-in-law, Margaret. She lives with us now." The women smiled politely, the way people do when they're waiting for more information. Ashley's smile widened. "Margaret is our leech maid. She lives with us and does the housework. It works out perfectly. She needs a place to stay, and I need help keeping up with everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. Leech maid. In front of strangers, in front of colleagues, in front of people who'd known me for decades as Robert Thompson's wife and business partner. The women laughed uncomfortably, not sure how to respond. One of them, a blonde woman in an expensive dress, tried to smooth things over. "How nice that you can help each other out," she said to me with that pitying tone people use when they think they're being kind. I stood there, frozen, holding my wine glass, with hands that had started to shake. I looked across the room and found Michael talking to a group of clients near the silent auction display. He was laughing at something someone had said, completely unaware that his wife had just publicly humiliated his mother 20 feet away. "Excuse me," I managed to whisper, and walked quickly toward the ladies' room. I locked myself in a stall and sat down on the toilet seat, still wearing my elegant new dress, still holding my wine glass, and tried to process what had just happened. Leech maid. The words echoed in my head like a cruel song. Ashley saw me as a parasite, someone who took without giving, who consumed without contributing. In her version of our family story, I was the old woman who'd imposed herself on their perfect life, expecting charity and offering only manual labor in return. She had no idea that the money for her perfect house, her perfect lifestyle, her husband's perfect company, had come from my sacrifices. She had no idea that every dividend check Michael received, every bonus, every profit-sharing payment was possible because I'd invested my life savings and my inheritance into making Thompson Industries successful. She had no idea that I wasn't the leech. She was. When I finally emerged from the bathroom, the party was in full swing. I walked through the crowd like a ghost, invisible despite my carefully chosen outfit and professionally styled hair. I found a quiet corner and watched the celebration of everything I'd helped create, listening to speeches about vision and hard work and the American dream. Michael gave a toast thanking his father's memory and looking toward the future. He mentioned valued employees, loyal clients, and supportive family. He never said my name. At the end of the evening, as we waited for the valet to bring our car, Ashley chatted excitedly about the connections she'd made and the compliments she'd received on her dress. "Did you have fun tonight, Margaret?" she asked with false concern. "You seemed a little quiet." "It was lovely," I said, because what else could I say? In the back seat of Michael's BMW, watching the city lights blur past, I made a decision. I was done being invisible. I was done being grateful for scraps from the table I'd helped set. I was done pretending that Ashley's casual cruelty was just a misunderstanding that would resolve itself with time and patience. I was done being the leech maid in my own life story. It was time to remind everyone exactly who I was and what I was capable of when pushed too far. But I wouldn't do it Ashley's way, with dramatic confrontations and public scenes. I'd do it the way Robert had taught me, with patience, preparation, and the kind of quiet power that changes everything without making a sound. The next morning, I started making phone calls. The first call I made was to Janet Morrison, Robert's old attorney. The The second was to Dr. Patricia Wells, my physician, to schedule the checkup I'd been avoiding for months. The third was to Eleanor Martinez from accounting, asking if she could recommend a good financial advisor. I didn't make these calls from the house. Instead, I drove to the public library downtown, the same one where Robert and I used to research patent applications in the early days. I sat in the quiet corner by the business section, surrounded by young people studying for exams and retirees reading newspapers, and began the process of remembering who I used to be. "Mrs. Thompson," Janet said when I reached her office that afternoon, "I was so sorry to hear about the troubles with Ashley. Eleanor mentioned you might need some legal guidance." I'd forgotten how news traveled in our small business community. Eleanor had worked for Thompson Industries for 15 years. She'd watched me transition from active partner to invisible house manager. She'd seen the gradual erasure of my role and status. "I need to understand my legal position," I said simply, "regarding the company, the house, everything Robert left behind." Janet pulled out a thick file folder. "I was wondering when you'd come to see me. Robert was very specific about his intentions. Let me show you exactly what he set up." For the next 2 hours, Janet walked me through documents I'd signed, but never fully understood. The house on Elm Street was in my name alone. Robert had transferred the deed to me 3 years before his death for tax purposes. The company ownership was exactly as I remembered. 52% in my name, 48% in Michael's. "But here's what you might not realize," Janet continued, pulling out another set of papers. "As majority shareholder, you have the right to call board meetings, approve major decisions, and even remove officers if necessary. Robert structured it this way intentionally." She handed me a letter, still sealed, with my name written in Robert's careful handwriting. "He left this for you with instructions to give it to you if you ever came to me with questions about your ownership rights." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Robert's words, written 2 years before his death, felt like hearing his voice again. "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, it means someone has made you question your worth or your place in the company we built together. I'm writing this because I know you'll never demand what's rightfully yours. You've always been too generous, too willing to step aside for others. You are not a silent partner. You are not a beneficiary of my success. You are the co-founder of Thompson Industries, and everything we achieved was possible because of your sacrifice, your investment, and your unwavering faith in our dream. I gave you majority control, not as a gift, but as recognition of what you earned. Use it wisely. Use it boldly. Use it to protect what we built and to claim the respect you deserve. Never let anyone make you feel like a burden in the house you own or a stranger in the company you helped create." "All my love, Robert." I sat in Janet's office and cried for the first time since the anniversary party. Not the quiet, dignified tears I'd shed in bathroom stalls, but deep, shuddering sobs that came from 20 years of buried grief and anger. "Take your time," Janet said, handing me tissues and closing her office door. When I finally composed myself, Janet laid out my options clearly. "You have complete legal authority to restructure the company leadership. You could remove Michael as CEO if you chose to. You could sell your shares. You could dissolve the company entirely. Or," she paused, "you could exercise your authority more subtly." "What do you mean?" "You could start attending board meetings again. You could require approval for major expenditures. You could insist on quarterly reports delivered directly to you. You could remind everyone that Thompson Industries has 2 owners, not 1. I left Janet's office with copies of every document, Robert's letter folded carefully in my purse, and the appointment scheduled for the following week to discuss strategy. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. Instead of starting dinner immediately when I got home, I went up to Robert's old office, the room Ashley had converted into her yoga studio. She was in town having lunch with friends, and Michael wouldn't be home for another hour. The room looked nothing like it had when Robert used it. Gone were his massive oak desk, his wall of business books, his filing cabinets full of company records. In their place were yoga mats, essential oil diffusers, and inspirational posters about finding inner peace. But Ashley hadn't found everything. I went to the built-in bookshelf that Robert had custom made in 1995. Running my fingers along the bottom edge of the third shelf, I found the hidden catch he'd shown me years ago. The panel slid open, revealing a space just large enough for important documents. Inside was exactly what I hoped to find: the original incorporation papers from 1983, stock certificates, and a manila envelope labeled MT Personal Investment Records in Robert's handwriting. I sat on Ashley's yoga mat and opened the envelope. Inside were copies of every check I'd written to support the business, every bank transfer, every financial sacrifice documented and preserved. Robert had kept records of everything: my initial $3,000 investment, the $20,000 from my inheritance, even smaller contributions I'd forgotten about, gas money for client visits, money for office supplies, the deposit for our first warehouse space. At the bottom of the envelope was a spreadsheet in Robert's handwriting, titled Maggie's True Investment in Thompson Industries. The total, calculated with compound interest through 2010, was $247,000. $247,000. Nearly $250,000 that I'd invested over the years, money that had been the foundation for everything Thompson Industries became. I photographed every document with my phone, then carefully returned everything to its hiding place. Ashley would never think to look for anything important in her Zen sanctuary. Over the next 3 days, I quietly began my research. I downloaded 20 years of company financial reports from the corporate website. I studied profit margins, revenue growth, and dividend distributions. I researched comparable companies and industry standards. What I discovered made me angrier than the anniversary party humiliation. Thompson Industries was more successful than I'd realized. The company was generating $12 million in annual revenue with a profit margin of 32%. Based on industry standards, the company was worth approximately $3.2 million. My 52% ownership meant I controlled assets worth $1.66 million. I was not a leech maid. I was a millionaire. More importantly, I discovered exactly how Ashley funded her expensive lifestyle. As Michael's wife, she had access to the family accounts that received dividend payments from the company. Last year alone, those payments totaled $156,000 items. The house renovations, the designer clothes, the spa appointments, the elaborate vacations. Everything was paid for with money generated by the company I co-owned. Ashley wasn't just insulting me. She was spending my money while doing it. That revelation led to my second major decision. I called Patricia Wells and scheduled an appointment not for a routine checkup, but for a complete physical and mental health evaluation. I need documentation that I'm competent to make my own financial and legal decisions, I told her. I need it in writing, signed and notarized. Patricia, who'd been my doctor for 15 years, understood immediately. Are you having problems with Michael and Ashley? I'm having problems with people who think age means incompetence, I said. I want protection. The evaluation took 2 hours. Cognitive tests, memory assessments, psychological screenings, physical examinations. Patricia was thorough to the point of redundancy. Margaret, she said as she signed the final forms, you're sharper than most people half your age. Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning is sound and your judgment is completely intact. Anyone who suggests otherwise is either mistaken or has ulterior motives. Armed with legal documentation of my mental competence and financial ownership rights, I began phase 2 of my quiet revolution. I opened my own checking account at a different bank, one where Ashley couldn't accidentally see my statements. I had my dividend payments redirected to this new account. I applied for a credit card in my name only. For the first time in 2 years, I had access to my own money without having to ask permission or provide explanations. The feeling was intoxicating. I used my first independent purchase to rent a storage unit across town. Over the course of a week, while Ashley was at her various appointments and Michael was at work, I carefully moved my most precious possessions out of the house. Photo albums, Robert's awards, and mementos, my grandmother's china, the jewelry Robert had given me over the years. Everything that had meaning and value. I wasn't planning to disappear. I was planning to be ready. My third major step was updating my will. I met with Janet again, this time with a clear agenda. I want to ensure that if something happens to me, my ownership in Thompson Industries passes to my grandchildren, not to Michael directly, I told her. I want a trust established that Ashley cannot access or control. That's very wise, Janet agreed. Given the current family dynamics, protecting the children's inheritance makes perfect sense. We structured the trust so that Michael Jr. and Emma would inherit my shares when they turned 30, with an independent trustee managing the assets until then. Michael would continue as CEO, but he'd answer to the trustee, not to Ashley. "What about the house?" Janet asked. I thought about this carefully. The house represented 30 years of memories, but it also represented my complete erasure from family life. "I want to sell it," I said. "Michael and Ashley can buy it from me at fair market value, or I'll sell it to someone else. Either way, I'm moving out." Janet's eyebrows rose. "That's a significant decision, Margaret." "It's an overdue decision," I corrected. Finding my new home took 3 weeks of quiet searching. I looked at condominiums, senior living communities, and rental properties. What I found was perfect. A 2-bedroom penthouse apartment in the renovated Hartwell building downtown, 6 blocks from Thompson Industries, and 3 blocks from the library where I'd started my research. The apartment had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, a modern kitchen with granite countertops, and enough space for the life I wanted to build. The building had a doorman, a fitness center, and a community room for social events. Most importantly, it had a study where I could set up a proper home office. I put down a deposit and signed a lease before telling anyone about my decision. The conversation with Michael happened on a Tuesday evening in October. Ashley was upstairs giving the twins their bath, and Michael was in the living room reading emails on his laptop. "Michael," I said, sitting down across from him, "we need to talk." He looked up with that distracted expression he wore most evenings, already mentally calculating how to end the conversation quickly. "I'm moving out," I said simply. "I found an apartment downtown. I'll be gone by the end of the month." That got his full attention. "Mom, what are you talking about? You can't just move out. Where will you go? How will you afford it?" The questions revealed everything I needed to know about how completely Michael had absorbed Ashley's version of our family finances. He genuinely believed I was financially dependent on their charity. "I'll be fine," I said. "I've made arrangements." "But Mom, be practical. You're 70 years old. You haven't worked in decades. You can't just decide to live independently." I pulled out a folder of documents, bank statements, lease agreements, and a letter from Patricia Wells confirming my mental competence. "Michael, I own 52% of Thompson Industries. I receive dividend payments that total more than most people's annual salaries. I'm not a charity case. I'm not financially dependent on you and Ashley. I'm not anyone's burden." He stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. "You're a majority shareholder," I continued patiently. "That means I own more of the company than you do. It means I have voting rights, decision-making authority, and financial independence. It means I never needed charity in the first place." I knew about the ownership structure," Michael said slowly, "but I thought it was just a formality. Dad always said you owned half the company, but I assumed it was just a gesture." It wasn't a gesture. It was earned. I told him about the money I'd invested, the sacrifices I'd made, the years I'd worked without pay to build the foundation of his success. I showed him copies of the original stock certificates and Robert's letter explaining his decisions. Michael sat in silence for several minutes, processing information that should have been obvious but had somehow become invisible over the years. "Mom," he said finally, "I had no idea. I mean, I knew you and Dad built the company together, but I thought—" Ashley said— "What did Ashley say?" He looked uncomfortable. "She said you were living here because you couldn't afford to live anywhere else. She said we needed to take care of you because you didn't have any resources of your own." "And you believed that without checking? Without asking me directly?" "I trusted my wife," he said defensively, "and you never said anything different." "I shouldn't have had to. You should have known." The conversation continued for another hour, with Michael asking questions that revealed how completely he'd misunderstood our family's financial reality. He'd accepted Ashley's narrative so completely that he'd forgotten his own childhood, forgotten watching me work alongside his father, forgotten the business discussions at our dinner table. When I finally went to bed that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The secret was out. The truth was spoken. The process of reclaiming my life had officially begun. 2 weeks later, I stood in my new apartment surrounded by boxes and possibilities. The movers had finished bringing up my furniture from storage, and I was finally alone in a space that belonged entirely to me. I made coffee in my new kitchen, carried it to the window seat overlooking the river, and called Janet Morrison. "Phase 1 is complete," I told her. "I'm ready for Phase 2. "What exactly is Phase 2? I watched the sun set over the town where I'd spent my entire adult life, where I'd built a business and raised a son and lost a husband, where I'd been forgotten and dismissed and reduced to a cruel nickname by someone who owed her entire lifestyle to my sacrifices. I'm going to remind everyone at Thompson Industries exactly who I am," I said, "starting with the quarterly board meeting next month. Are you sure you're ready for that?" I thought about Robert's letter, about Ashley's humiliation, about Michael's shocked expression when he realized I wasn't the helpless old woman he'd thought I was. "I've been ready for 2 years, I said. "I just didn't know it yet." The next morning, I called the Thompson Industries office and spoke to Patricia Chang, the executive assistant who'd worked for the company since 1995. "Patricia, this is Margaret Thompson," I said. "I need you to schedule a board meeting for next Friday at 10 a.m. As majority shareholder, I'll be chairing the meeting." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Thompson? Of course. Should I notify Mr. Thompson?" "Mr. Thompson will be notified along with all other board members," I said. "This is official company business." I hung up and smiled. After 2 years of silence, Margaret Thompson was about to remind everyone exactly who she was and what she was capable of when people pushed her too far. The leech maid was dead. The majority shareholder was back.